Hey Omar, how's it going?
Hey, it's going good.
So I created this spreadsheet I use to kind of compile people's estimates about how they see the future panning out. You can see at the bottom, I started with Dirty Tesla. That was episode one. And I hope to have the others, AI driver, Larry, Uzi, etc., on this one-on-one interview as well. So let's start with this. And then we're going to talk about year 2030, robotaxis, Optimus, a couple of questions about Elon, and some personal questions about you, if you're okay with that.
Great.
All right. So let's start with Cybertruck. This is a controversial topic. When do you think Cybertruck will outsell the F 150?
Well, I mean, it's really difficult to predict the future in terms of what F-150 sales are going to be and what Cybertruck sales are going to be. But I would bet that self-driving will probably be just as important in trucks as cars, if not more. So I would probably say that, let's say they're about 600,000 now. Cybertruck's doing about 60,000 a year right now. So I think probably by 2030, they have a good chance at outselling the F-150, if not sooner. I think that's a pretty conservative estimate.
Okay, 2030. Why do you say FSD will be more important on trucks?
Well, if you think about what the value is of a mile, a passenger mile or, a food delivery mile or something like that is less valuable than a commercial mile. So if you need to move goods for your store, if you need to have a semi truck, if you need to have a truck that's doing large hauls of product, for example, the value to the end user is probably a little greater in that segment than in the passenger segment.
All right. And why? I'm a little surprised by that estimate, 2030. I was expecting more. In maybe I'm more optimistic, but what makes you say it'll wait until 2030?
Well, like I said, it's really difficult to predict the future in terms of exact dates. I don't know what the pace of these things is going to be. I don't know how fast FSD is going to get to driverless. I don't know how fast F-150 sales will fall. Maybe they won't, maybe they'll grow. I don't know what the ramp up of Cybertruck is going to be. So, given all those uncertainties, I'm guessing 2030 is sort of a conservative estimate. I mean, that's about 5, 6 years from now. So, in the auto industry, you can't just ramp up product overnight. It's got to take at a minimum, 2, 3 years to get to that level where they can outsell the F-150 at a minimum. So 2030 is probably a fairly conservative estimate. Of course, there's no telling that they'll ever outsell the F-150, but I think they will, and I think it'll probably happen by 2030.
All right, great. Let's go to semi. When do you think Tesla will have 1,000, 10,000, and 100,000 semis produced and on the roads?
Yeah, I have no clue. Um, I have no clue how to predict this. So I don't know any data points on their production. If you had asked me when the Semi was unveiled in 2017, how many do you think they're going to produce? I probably would have been way off. So they haven't even really started volume production yet. I'm not sure what volumes we can expect in the first year. A lot of it really has to do with the battery ramp up. So really, I have no clue. I could make a wild guess if you want, but it's just going to be a guess.
That's okay. If we can skip this section. Let's go to miles to disengagement. 1,000 miles between disengagements, all disengagements, and then 10,000, 100,000, and 1 million. So right now, according to the FSD tracker, the community tracker, we're about a couple hundred miles between critical disengagements. When do you think that's going to get to 1,000?
I think you could maybe argue they're getting close to 1,000 with this latest version. I would probably say that by October 10th, I think the latest version of FSD will be at 1,000 miles in between critical disengagements.
Okay. What about 10,000?
For 10,000, I think they could get
That's
there
where
by.
that's where Waymo is, right? Tens of thousands between critical disengagements.
Well, their test fleet's at about 18,000. Their driverless fleet is at about 80,000. That doesn't count remote interventions, obviously. So in the 10,000 to 100,000 range, you can probably start to deploy some test fleets and have them start operating first with a safety driver and then driverlessly. So, 1,000 maybe by 1010. And of course, this is a guess. There's no way for me to know when this is actually going to happen. I have hopes about how fast it'll happen, but this obviously depends on execution. But I'll guess, 1010, 1,000 miles for critical intervention. By the end of Q1 2025, I think they'll get to 10,000 miles in between. By, let's say, January 1st, 2026, I think they get to 100,000. And by
January 1, 2026, is that what you said?
Mhm.
Okay. And then what was 10,000? Q1 2025?
10,000 was Q1, end of Q1 2025. So March
Okay.
31st, 2025.
Okay. And now 1 million.
1 million, I would think, would probably take another 18 months after that. So maybe by Q3 2027.
Okay. Yeah, these are, I think this is, let's look at Chris's answers. I think these are more aggressive than Chris. So Chris said 1,000 by Q2 2025, 10,000 by Q1 2026, 100,000 by Q2 2027. So you expect it to go from 1,000 to 10,000 to 100,000 way quicker than his timeline. So you expect the acceleration, even when we think
Yeah.
exponentially, right?
Well, if you look at what's happened over the last few years, it has been an acceleration in progress, not a linear progress and not a slowdown in progress. So you see this a lot of times in technology, the law of accelerating returns. The law of accelerating returns happens when something makes itself happen faster. For example, in the design of microprocessors, you had people design chips, then they started using these computer chips to design better computer chips. And they started using those computer chips to design better computer chips. The information technology improved the information technology. And so you had that feedback loop, and computers are so much more powerful now than they used to be. Similarly with FSD, as it gets better, more people start using it in more places. As more people start using it, it gets even better. And as it gets even better, they can justify spending more, putting more capital in, and making it even better. So that's really the mechanism by which we're seeing this accelerating improvement. And we're really just at the beginning with the 12 series here.
Okay, great. Number of Tesla robotaxis on the fleet, 1,000 and 1 million milestones. Now, this can be both Tesla owned fleet and also customers adding their cars to the fleet. So combined figure.
Okay, 1,000 let's say by Q4 2026, I think they'll have 1,000. So Waymo only has 600 today. So at this point, they'd be bigger than Waymo is today. Then,
Yeah.
I think a million um, could probably happen by Q4 2027. It could be pretty quick. Once you get to the first 1,000, you're not far off from just enabling any car to run it. And given that their fleet is 6 million vehicles, even assuming, let's say, only hardware 5 or only hardware 4 and 5 were able to run it, I think you could get to a million easily. Even if some jurisdictions only, let's say one country, US, China, enabled it, then I think you could get to a million by the end of 2027.
Okay. Now let me ask you this too right here. So you have 1 million miles between critical disengagements by Q3 2027, but only 1 million robotaxis by Q4 2027. So around the same time.
Mhm.
So by this time, Tesla should have about 10 million plus Teslas on the roads. And even if 10% of them added their cars to the fleet, that would be a million. And Tesla will also have its own cars, right? Do you expect the percentage of owners adding their cars to be as low as 10% or lower?
Well, in terms of the regulatory approval, which jurisdictions it'll be approved in, how many cars are eligible, how many of those cars people are using personally versus adding to a robotaxi fleet. There may be 10 million cars that are running FSD and many of them giving people rides for personal use. But in terms of the robotaxi fleet hitting a million sort of, full-time or part-time vehicles in the fleet, that's a little bit of a different number than just the total number of cars running FSD. I mean, if we really get to a million miles between intervention, this thing is going to be significantly better than a human for years before this mark is achieved.
Okay. Next section, Optimus. And we're going to dig into these a little bit more kind of not quantitative, but qualitatively in later sections. But 1,000 Optimus fleet. So this is to external customers, not for use in Tesla's factory. So it could be industrial, commercial, or households, but external.
Yeah, again, this is a guess. We don't know when Optimus production is going to start, if it's ever going to start, if there's going to be any customers that want to buy it, if it's going to be competitive. But just based on Elon's timeline, that by next year they're going to be having more of them in their own factory. By 2026, they're going to be selling it to external customers. I would probably say by the end of Q3 2027, they'll probably have 1,000.
Okay.
And a million. Let's see. How long would it take to ramp from 1,000 to a million? Maybe. Are we talking a million total Optimus produced?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So
Cumulative.
not a million a year.
No.
Or maybe let's say Q1 2029.
Okay.
And
And
then
then
a
1 billion.
billion. Well, that one's a tough one to predict.
Mm-hmm.
I'd have to say probably 2030 plus.
Okay. 2030 plus. I read all of my replies on X and YouTube, and I saw an interesting reply the other day about Optimus. You know how Elon always says prototypes are easy, production is hard?
Mhm.
This person claimed that Optimus will require extreme intelligence to be useful, way beyond what the LLMs can do today. So
Of course.
this person said, Optimus could be the opposite, where prototype is hard and production easy. So once you get to the first 1,000, ramping up to 1,000,000 could be easier than ramping up to cars. What do you think about that?
Um, I think prototypes are still easy compared to production. I mean, when you talk about billions, right? So let's say every person in the world needs a robot, or even needs two robots, or needs three robots, and there's 7 to 10 billion people on Earth. You need to make billions of these things. The logistical challenges of just getting the raw materials, making the parts for millions and millions and millions of these things is really going to be still, I think, the major challenge. The software is evolving quite rapidly. I think that when you just look at what AI is doing, obviously today's LLMs are not powerful enough to do everything we want Optimus to do,
Right.
but it's surprising how much they can do already.
Okay.
So there's a lot of software work to do, but mass production, I think, is still going to be the challenging part. And in order to
Okay.
get the full benefit of Optimus, we're going to need to make a lot of them.
Right. All right. We're going to dig into Optimus in a little bit and the milestones, hurdles ahead for both Robotaxi and Optimus. Let's go to market cap. Now, this is pure guess, obviously. Anything can
Mhm.
happen. A lot plays into the market cap of any stock, let alone Tesla. But when do you think Tesla will get back to all-time highs, starting with 1 trillion, then 10 trillion, then 100 trillion market capitalization?
I find it shocking that they're not at $1 trillion market cap right now, based on what I'm
Right.
seeing with FSD. Um, I would say probably before the end of 2025, we'll probably see them at all-time highs.
Okay. Now 10 trillion.
Well, I mean, it's difficult to predict if they ever get to 10 trillion, but you know,
Well, I mean, if they're, let's say, if they have produced 1,000,000 Optimus by Q1 2019, do
yeah,
you
I mean,
think,
sure.
right?
They might be worth 10 trillion then. Let's put a box there, sure.
Okay. And then 100 trillion. You can always skip the question too if you don't feel comfortable
Yeah, I
putting out a
mean,
guess.
it's really difficult to predict um what the world even looks like at that point. Obviously, no company has ever achieved a market cap of 10 trillion or 100 trillion. So I
Hmm.
guess my answer on those would just be I don't know. I don't know if they ever will achieve that type of market cap. I hope they will, but we can maybe just put it at 2030 plus.
Okay. 2030 plus. Now, this section is more for fun. Who do you think is going to be first on Mars? Optimus or humans?
Huh. I think Optimus will probably be there first. It would make sense to send an Optimus and
Hmm.
maybe start setting things up, be able to remote control them. So I think Optimus will be there first. I mean,
What are you thinking?
this is a hard
Pure
one
guess.
to predict.
Pure
Yeah,
guess.
pure
Yeah.
guess,
The other
obviously.
ones are easy.
I mean, yeah. So space isn't my expertise. I know that um, you do have to wait for a point where Mars and Earth are close together. So I'm not sure when those dates exactly are. Maybe that would help inform my guess. But
Mhm.
let's say let we somewhere between 1,000 and 1,000,000 Optimus. They'll probably send one over. So let's just give a wild guess and say Q1 2028.
Okay. First human.
Let's say Q4 2029.
Okay. 2 years of Optimus on Mars alone without any humans. This period right
Yeah,
here. That's kind of interesting.
it'll be interesting to show up in a planet full of Optimus.
Hmm. And then when do you think we'll have 1 million humans on Mars? Colonization.
That's probably 2040 plus, if not 2050 plus. I'll be
Which
optimistic
one?
and say 2040s.
Okay. 2040s.
I mean, that would be amazing to have a million humans living on Mars. That's beyond anything I can imagine.
Would you go?
To visit, maybe after they set up, if they've got a Hilton there and it's looking safe, Starship's all worked out.
Hmm.
But I like Earth. Um,
Hmm.
Space seems very perilous. I would love to go to space at some point if it were affordable, just to look down at the Earth. Um, Astronauts who have gone have said it's a life-changing experience, but I think most people are pretty comfortable here on Earth right now.
Okay. All right. Let's talk about year 2030. This column right here. Okay. So in our daily Tesla Live spaces, live streams on YouTube, we focus more on daily topics like the stock price, uh, news of the day, and we never really get a chance to talk about the longer term, 2030 plus. So you have Cybertruck outselling the F-150, 2030 plus. We have 1 billion, 1 million to in the 2030, 1 million to 1 billion range of Optimus roaming around. Tesla market cap is at between 10 to 100 trillion dollars. All right. What percent of miles do you think will be driverless versus human driven in the year 2030?
Probably more than 99% of miles will be driven by software by then.
Wow. Wow. Okay. That's a that's pretty amazing. So you think most people will give up car ownership at that point?
Well, even if people didn't give up car ownership, the computers that could drive would be driving so many miles because they're driving 24/7 that they would quickly eclipse all human driving. And I think most humans are going to switch to using software to get around rather than driving themselves. And I think that probably most of them are going to abandon car ownership.
This I mean this is only 5 plus 5.5 years away. 5, 6 years away.
Yeah, we're living through a
Yeah.
pretty incredible time. A lot of people have called it a new industrial revolution. So, if you had lived through the industrial revolution and you'd been born before it and seen what happened after, you would have seen the whole world change. And the industrial revolution about 100 or so years ago, actually, before that, a few hundred years ago, was really when we went from doing a lot of manual labor. So back then, humans had to do a lot of work. They had to build things themselves, sew clothes themselves. Pretty much everything that was done just through humans eating and then using the power of their own body to do work. So life was progressing at a very slow rate. A lot more people were hurt doing things, killed. It was a lot more normal back then. So in the Industrial Revolution, it all started with the steam engine. And we figured out a way to take energy in the form of fossil fuels and stored hydrocarbons and take that energy and build a machine that could do physical work for us. So now instead of that human having to sew that shirt themselves, you could have a sewing machine that could use stored energy and then make a shirt much faster without you having to do anything. And Tesla was really created to solve that original sin of the Industrial Revolution, where we built this incredible economy on fossil fuels, but we knew it was unsustainable. We knew fossil fuels couldn't last forever. So we had to build a new system that the economy could run on to bring us energy so we can continue to use industrial machinery to automate all the labor and tasks that we need to do. And now Tesla's kind of shifted. They've made significant progress on the first goal, accelerating the transition. They're continuing to work on that. But we've now discovered that in this new industrial revolution that's happening today, you can't, energy isn't just useful for automating manual labor. Energy can also be used to automate intellectual tasks too. It can be used to produce automated intelligence or artificial intelligence. And that's really the time we're living through now, where we find out we can train these models, have them watch humans, watch how they behave, and then copy that decision making process, copy that intelligence into a digital form where you can continue to use energy and have that intelligence executed artificially. So this is a big shift. And just like the automation of physical labor changed the world, we're watching things really dramatically shift with the automation of intelligence.
Okay. Thank you for the explanation. Let's talk market share. In 2030, if 99% of miles are driven by software, what percent of those miles will be on Tesla robotaxis?
I would hope that Tesla could take at least maybe a 20% share of the global miles market.
Okay. And how is the other 80% divided?
I would imagine that it's probably divided among 3 to 5 large players who are uh, probably about equal in size. But depending on how things go, it could be also a winner take most structure where Tesla has more than 50% of the market, and there's several other smaller players in other markets, other countries maybe taking the rest of the share of the market. It's difficult to know for sure what the structure of the market's going to be. It's conservative to assume it might look a lot like the auto industry today, where you have several big companies and none of them is really taking more than 10 to 20%. But if you really look at the way AI works, where you have feedback loops, network effects, where the best software gets used the most, which makes it continue to get better, which makes it continue to learn faster. Those sorts of dynamics may be more conducive to a situation where you have one player that is dominant and takes more than 50% of the market, kind of like Apple in the United States today. But I'm going to go with the more conservative answer and say if they can take 20% of the market, I'm going to be happy. I mean, you look at the size of the global miles market, there's trillions of miles traveled a year. Even getting 10 or 20% is a massive business for any company.
Okay, thank you. Are you do you feel comfortable predicting second, third, fourth players? Doesn't have to be in order, but let's say, for example, Waymo, probably one of them. Would you agree?
No, I don't think so. I
Wow.
don't see them staying around long term. Google does not have a great history of keeping side projects alive that aren't search. I mean, their cash cow search business is just such a incredible business. It just produces so much cash that everything else ends up looking kind of like a waste of time by comparison. And you can see the sort of killed by Google accounts. They're obviously an early pioneer, but it would be like saying, "Oh, GM is really doing so great with the EV1." They're obviously going to have a huge share of the EV market in the future, and that obviously didn't hold logically. So I don't think necessarily being a pioneer, which Waymo is. I think they're the best driverless service in the world right now, but that doesn't necessarily guarantee that they're going to dominate the market. And I don't currently believe that they're going to be one of the major players. I would expect maybe a Chinese player to become a major player, maybe a company we haven't heard of yet, maybe a company that hasn't even been founded yet. And I would imagine there would be at least one or two major American competitors, and maybe maybe one or two in Europe. But Europe seems to be a little bit behind the US and China on AI today.
Okay. What do you think will be the average price per mile traveled on driven by software in 2030? So assume today is about $2 to $3 per mile on Uber. Where do you see that going?
So it's obviously really difficult to predict. I think there's going to be a variety of products. So you'll have products that are just bare bones, lowest cost per mile, and I think you could see the cost per mile go uh, to $1 or below easily with that lowest cost per mile option. I think people will pay more to ride in a better vehicle, to maybe be able to get there faster, to have extras in the car. That I think will increase the price per mile. Obviously, doing commercial shipping where you're getting a semi truck instead of a Model 3 is going to have a higher cost per mile. So essentially, depending on the vehicle and how it's equipped, um, you'll have a range of products to choose from that have a different price per mile, and you'll be able to pick the one that suits you the best. So a typical customer might pay, whatever they're comfortable with, just like you have a variety of vehicles in the market today ranging from 15,000 to 80,000. Really, it's going to be a matter of what you want. And someone might choose at sometimes a higher priced vehicle or a lower priced vehicle. I think when you get to really the low end of the market, you'll probably be able to hail a ride for free, $0 per mile on a free or ad supported basis. But that car is probably going to be the oldest, crappiest car. It's going to be torn up. It's not going to be as nice to ride in. Might smell like pee a little bit for some reason. And and there's going to be annoying ads playing, right? So if you're willing to pay more, you can get a little nicer car, maybe watch your own movie, that type of thing. But, just to give you a sense of what Waymo is charging right now in Los Angeles and San Francisco, it's actually around $8 to $10 a mile, which is around what Uber and Lyft are charging as well. In major metro areas, they do charge more. So I think that you could come into the market initially when Tesla launches their first robotaxis and charge anywhere from a dollar a mile to $5 a mile. When you really look at the value, it's better than an Uber or Lyft. So you can charge about what an Uber or Lyft is charging at first and start picking off customers. After that, gradually keep reducing the price over time to convince everybody to switch. But you
Okay.
probably don't even have to make it that much cheaper to convince people that they prefer it.
Okay. Let's dig into that a little bit. So you said there will be a variety of experiences, variety of cars. How will the experience, let's focus on Tesla robotaxis in 2030. How will the experience differ from today's Uber ride minus the driver or say a Waymo ride?
Yeah, I think the big difference is really going to be the level of vertical integration. So, Tesla has no true competitors that are a full copy of Tesla. They have companies that compete with different segments of the business. Like, for example, Waymo competes with FSD, but they don't make vehicles and they don't make robots. Jaguar, that makes the vehicles that Waymo is currently using, they're a car company. So they compete with the auto part of the business, but they don't compete with the FSD part of the business, and they don't compete with the charging network part of the business. So Tesla is really a conglomeration of a lot of different companies. For a lot of people, a company that makes battery cells, that would be a whole company with $1 billion market cap. But it's just one small part of Tesla. So I think really with a ride sharing service, and you can kind of see this in some of their screenshots, having something where you have a cloud profile, it saves all your settings, what temperature you like in the car, what driving style you like, if there's a certain way you like to get home, where your house is, all these little details that you set in your Tesla, they're going to be synced between cars. So when you call the next car, it's going to remember what temperature you set. It's going to remember what music you were listening to. It's going to play it, and you'll be able to control that all from the Tesla app. So in an Uber, you call an Uber, it just gives you some car. You don't have the ability to control the air conditioning. But Tesla's already built all this stuff. You can already control the air conditioning in your Tesla. So you'll be able to just set the temperature in your Robotaxi, configure it just the way you want, and have that car come to you. And everything is really going to be designed from top to bottom. The rideshare network, the car, the self-driving software, the charging network, it's all going to be built together and give the user a user experience that the other guys are really going to struggle to build.
Okay. Do you think Neuralink will play a role in robotaxis in 2030?
Um, hmm. It's tough to predict where Neuralink is going to be in 2030. I mean, if Neuralink is something that people can get, they might be able to use it to call a car, give the car feedback, control the car, much like your phone is used today. But I don't see them necessarily being that related. I think Neuralink is just a next generation version of the smartphone in a way.
Okay. What about Boring Company? Do you think underground tunnels will play a major role in 2030 in transportation?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because what you're going to see happen even before autonomy is that as transportation on the roads gets easier and easier because AI is doing it for you, people are going to start driving more. Instead of taking short haul flights, they're going to take a car and sleep in the car, or even just sit there and let the car handle the driving. They're going to start using it more and more. Whereas they may have hated to get in traffic before, well, if they can just play video games or watch a movie or go on their phone while they're in traffic, then it's not really that different than sitting on their couch. So immediately you're going to see road miles increase. Then, as autonomy scales around the world, you're going to see even more road usage. Suddenly, a person being in the car is no longer the limiting factor. So you're going to see cars that are driving around without a driver. You're going to see a car that's driving around with just a sandwich, just a pizza. And you're going to see cars that don't have anyone in them going back home, doing all kinds of tasks. All this is going to add up to more cars on the road. So, what do we do when suddenly the amount of road traffic increases, let's say 2 times, 3 times, maybe even as much as 10 times? we're going to have to build a lot more roads, right? But this is very complicated because in our cities, we already have a lot of stuff built around the roads. So it's very difficult to build a new road. You have to get environmental approval, and in some cases, you have to buy the land from somebody. It just costs way too much. We can't really build roads on the surface that easily. Now, if you dig under the city, you can dig under the city without bothering anybody. No one's even going to know that there's a tunnel being constructed underneath them. And you can go anywhere. You can go right under that museum. You can go right under that mall, wherever you need to go, and have the tunnel go right straight up into the parking garage. And guess what? Humans don't really like being underground. We prefer to be overground. But when the car doesn't have a driver, it doesn't care about the scenery. It can go drop you off and then head back home in a tunnel where it can just travel in a straight line without stopping, zero interventions, no worrying about a pedestrian jumping out or anything like that. And it can just head back home, and that tunnel can go straight back into your garage. And that's about it, right? You have an elevator, it goes up. So tunnels, I think, are a huge part of adding the additional capacity we need to really realize the full potential of robotaxi. And I think that's why Elon has started experimenting with it. It's not just some hobby, it's not just some joke. He was really thinking about, okay, if we need to make the road capacity we have available several times larger, tunnels are a really interesting way to do that within cities and even between cities.
Right. Omar, do you think Uber will be around in 2030? If 99% of miles are driven by software, do you think there's room for Uber at that point?
Yeah, it's a great question. Um, one of two things is going to happen. Uber's business is either going to explode upwards or downwards. If they're able to capture on the rise of autonomy and become the ride hailing platform for autonomous cars, then their earnings will actually increase substantially. But if the autonomous car providers are able to go direct to consumer and have their own apps or even a different app be responsible for hailing that ride hailing ride, which, as we talked about Tesla's vertical integration, you may see more and more manufacturers having to make their own app to really provide a matching experience. I mean, you could maybe try and make a generic version of that in Uber, but it kind of remains to be seen. It would be a little tougher to differentiate yourself when you're just one car on the Uber network. So it's really all about Dara Khosrowshahi's performance here as an executive. They've convinced Waymo to start accepting rides from the Uber network. That's kind of exactly what you want to see them doing. Obviously, Waymo is very limited today. But if they can get most of the autonomous cars to be available on the Uber network, then that's great for them. If you have a company like Tesla that rises up and dominates the market, then it very well could eliminate Uber entirely. And I mean, so imagine Tesla comes and starts handling just 5-10% of the rides and growing. Now you're going to have the human drivers on the network say, hey, what's going on? I'm getting fewer and fewer rides. Every month, I'm making less and less money. And I'm still going out there. I'm buying fuel. I'm maintaining my car. I'm making my car payments, but I'm making less and less money. And eventually, people are going to catch on that you can buy a Tesla and have it go out and do the work for you. And you can just sit home and monitor. And so, Uber is essentially a marketplace built on supply and demand from riders and supply of drivers. Now, as the robotaxi market blossoms, you're going to see both sides be hit. You're going to see the demand side see attrition to driverless cars. More and more people are going to switch. And by the way, the switching cost is nothing, right? You download the Tesla app and you call a ride. It's almost the exact same app. It was trivial for me to switch from Uber to Waymo. And I
Right.
use Waymo for almost all my hailing. But then the supply side also erodes as well. So as you see both the demand and the supply side sort of implode in this vicious cycle, things could start to fall apart very fast. And then as
Right.
riders look in their app and the wait time is now 15 minutes, then things just accelerate.
I mean, given that you expect millions of robotaxis later this decade, would you short Uber stock today?
It's too difficult to predict at this point. I don't see them necessarily as in danger in the next 4 quarters. I don't think Waymo's scaling that aggressively. Tesla doesn't have driverless cars on the market yet. And it remains to be seen what position Uber plays in all this. But looking ahead in the future, I would potentially look at it as a short, and I probably wouldn't initiate a long-term position into Uber or Lyft today.
Okay. Let's switch to Optimus. So in 2030, according to what we just discussed, you expect millions, if not tens of millions, of Optimus. What role
Mhm.
do you think Optimus will play in the society in 2030? Industrial, commercial, or households? What do you think Optimus will be doing in our society in 2030?
Everything. I think that pretty much any task that humans do, robots will be doing that task too, and they'll
As
actually
soon
be
as
doing it.
2030, though?
Oh yeah. I mean, look, you look at the Model Y, for example, and that came onto the market in 2020. And here we are in 2024. In 2023, they did 1.2 million units. So they were able to ramp up the Model Y to 1.2 million units in just 3 years. That is a significantly more complex product in many ways, many more parts, physically larger than a robot. Now, a robot has its own challenges to ramp up as well. But in 3, 4 years, I think they could ramp up to a million units. We're now 6 years away from 2030. I have no doubt that by 2030, you'll have multiple companies making millions of robots. And the cutting edge AI that'll be powering those robots' brains will probably be smarter than most humans, and very lifelike in pretty much every way. You'll be able to talk to these things, be friends with them, have them help you around the house, go and do tasks for you. It'll be just as essential as a smartphone to have a robot or a team of robots, right? I mean, you wouldn't hail a cab manually, right? You wouldn't call a cab company and ask for a cab in this day and age. You could if you want to, but the vast majority of people just use their smartphone and use an Uber or Lyft app and call a ride. And they use that smartphone for pretty much anything. You want to go to the movie? Check out your smartphone for tickets. Anything you want to do. You want to find directions? Same thing with robots. Pretty much anything we want to do. You want to go grocery shopping. You want to go maybe do your dishes, do your laundry. Robots will be helping with all of that.
Okay. You mentioned there will be other companies as well, which leads me to my next question, actually. Which companies do you think will have the most humanoids in 2030, except for Tesla? Who do you think is Tesla's biggest competitor when it comes to Optimus?
You know, again, this is a really tough question because the market's so nascent. I mean, we don't even know for sure that obviously Tesla is going to be making any robots, let alone be the leading provider. I think of any company you look at today, it's hard to find one that seems to have a better shot than Tesla at mass producing millions of robots. In terms of the other ones, I would probably look at China and South Korea. They are very good at manufacturing, high tech manufacturing, especially. And I think that when you're really talking about a large scale manufacturer of robots, they're probably going to be some Chinese company or some Korean company that maybe we haven't heard of or maybe we have heard of. The Chinese tech companies, for example, I think could be prime companies. There's also several humanoid robot startups in China. I think Unitree and some other ones. I can't remember the name off the top of my head. But the manufacturing prowess and electronic supply chain of China, I think, is going to put them at the forefront of the robotics market. As a matter of fact, they already are making more robots than anyone else, making robots that, for example, bring food to a table at a restaurant, things like that. So
Right.
there'll probably be at least one or two American companies that are competing, uh, but they'll probably have outsourced manufacturing as well. And probably, if I had to guess, I'd say that Chinese, South Korean, other Asian companies are probably going to have the highest volume humanoids besides Tesla.
What do you think? So you don't seem as convinced as I am that Tesla will produce Optimus in volume. That for you it seems probable but not certain. Is that fair?
I mean, I think Optimus is probably the number one priority in the company for Elon.
Right.
That's the great thing about this guy is he doesn't just see what the business is today. He sees what it could be. And
Right. So why do you sound less than certain about it? What do you think? Another way to ask this: what do you think are the biggest hurdles to get Optimus to volume production?
I mean, I think they're going to do it just based on their progress, right? But we're kind of trying to predict the future here. The future is uncertain. Um, a lot of things can happen. Maybe the company just runs out of money for some reason and they can't ramp Optimus, right? Maybe there's another competitor on the market that's so good. We don't know about this yet, right? It doesn't exist today, or at least we haven't heard of it. But maybe there's another competitor that's so good that they can't compete with it. So it's not that I don't think they can do it, but the future always has uncertainties, execution risk. So I believe they will execute, but until they actually do, until we see these things rolling off the line, being sold to other customers, being sold to consumers, it's a little bit difficult to predict how and when and even if that's going to happen.
Okay. What do you think the biggest hurdles to get Optimus to volume production? Hardware, software, regulation, social acceptance. What do you think will be the
Hmm.
most difficult to overcome?
Probably the software. We know how to make humanoid robots today. We can actually make a really good humanoid robot that is incredibly dexterous. What we don't know how to build is the robot's brain. And that's been the big mystery. But that's also what's changing now with today's deep learning techniques. So really, the software is the biggest open area that we don't know how to do. The hardware is challenging, particularly ramping up the hardware, making sure the hardware can really do everything a human can do. But the software is the piece that's never existed before in history.
Okay, so once the software is in place, the software is capable enough, you think the regulation and acceptance by the society won't be major bottlenecks? Is that fair?
As far as I'm aware, there aren't any regulations around humanoid robots today. Obviously, they don't really exist, so it's difficult to know what those regulations would be. But I would imagine that the usefulness of these things would be so high that government wouldn't necessarily want to interfere with people using them. I think some common sense regulations will be needed. Maybe you need a license if your robot's going to walk around the street on its own or something like that. Um, Maybe it'll need to be certified, just like a robotaxi is to some extent. But I think that'll be relatively easy compared to getting the software ready and ramping up the production of these things.
Okay. Let's switch gears to Elon, and I want to ask you a couple questions on it. So recently, Starbucks changed its CEO, poached Chipotle CEO, and will pay him $85 million in cash and stock. $85 million in cash and stock-based compensation. And if you look at the person's resume, so Brian Nicole went through Procter & Gamble, Pizza Hut, very successful career, Taco Bell, and was finally, lastly, Chipotle's CEO, replacing founder. During his tenure, he helped double Chipotle's revenue while its profits increased almost 7 times. The stock price of Chipotle has increased by almost 8 times under his leadership. He also increased salaries, etc. So, having achieved this revenue, profit, and stock price growth for that company, and when his leadership change from Chipotle to stock price was announced, the market cap of both companies changed by tens of billions of dollars. He's still getting paid $85 million. So, having said that, why does Elon deserve tens of billions of dollars versus tens of millions of dollars?
Well, I think that if you look at what this guy's equity is going to be worth, if he increases the value of the company, it'll be several $100 million. In a amazing scenario where they 10x the company, it'll be worth you know, maybe even close to $1 billion. So I think it's been shown that incentivizing CEOs who can dramatically affect the performance of the company pays off for shareholders. Otherwise, we wouldn't pay these guys so much, right? And they obviously have to put themselves at risk legally. They have to face a lot of scrutiny, face a lot of pressure, and you want to compensate them so that they aren't feeling like it's a better use of their time to do something else. But, as amazing of a CEO as this guy is, if I wanted to find somebody to run Starbucks, I could find you 100 guys who could do an amazing job running Starbucks or running Chipotle. But there's only one Elon Musk in this world. There's only one Steve Jobs in this world. There's only one Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla. There's a difference between building a city on Mars, something humanity has never done before, and making a burrito for someone to eat. So, I think it's a valid question whether it really makes sense and how much we're compensating Elon. But I think shareholders have done extremely well with this 2018 compensation package. And I wish more CEOs took this type of compensation package. I mean, if the Starbucks CEO, the new Starbucks CEO had come in and said, hey, pay me nothing unless I 10x the value of this company. And if I do, then, I want 10% of the company. I think that would be a great incentive structure for him, right? Either shareholders get rich or he gets nothing. And it's sad that a lot of people have looked at this sort of skin in the game compensation structure as unfair or a giveaway or more than somebody deserves. I would love to see more and more CEOs tying their performance to the performance that shareholders are seeing in their portfolio.
Okay. Now, next question on this is, having said that, how do you think about the key man risk in Tesla stock? Does it concern you as an investor? And what do you think would be a reasonable succession plan for Tesla?
What would be a succession plan for Tesla? I mean, I have no idea. You could argue that they're, in the case of Apple, for example, which is another company, big tech company with huge key man risk, he didn't try and find another Steve Jobs. He just tried to find somebody to run the company. And Apple has grown quite a bit since then, but it hasn't really innovated, created new products in the same way. And I think to some extent, you do want to preserve that culture of innovation. The Elon algorithm, his ethos, you want to find some way to preserve that, somebody you can. But at the same time, replacing him is going to be kind of impossible. So there's no use in even trying. We should find somebody who is the right person to lead the company, to grow the business. And there's a key man risk, but also key man reward. And the key man reward is massive. It justifies the key man risk. I mean, at a time when any other CEO would have been focused on just the auto business, he's taking the business in an entirely different direction. And there's not many people in the world who can think that out of the box, who can risk things at that level. At the point where we transition to a new CEO, there will be some pluses and some minuses. Obviously, there's many amazing things that Elon brings to the table that Tesla would be at a loss of without him. But on the other hand, things will, I think, mature for the business. I think you'll see earnings calls that look more like traditional earnings calls that Wall Street expects. As much as that might bore us, I think you'll start to see a more steady ship taking the business Elon built and continuing to scale it. And Elon's never been a scale the business kind of guy. He's more of a create the business kind of guy. I think the sort of scaling part, in terms of maintaining the business, running the business, looking at the little details of the auto business, that doesn't interest him as much as building something new, building Optimus, building FSD, right? So I think having a CEO of the company that can, still keep that innovation alive, but also just focus on the core business, talk to Wall Street about it, it'll actually help the business become more fully valued and scale as much as it can. Elon is extremely influential, but the stock is probably discounted at least $100 billion in market cap because there are a lot of people who don't feel safe investing in a company. They say, oh, everyone's upset at this guy. He's tweeting about politics. And I'm just scared to hold a stock like that. because what if the business just implodes because everybody's so mad at this guy and his political tweets? This is how a lot of people sort of think about it, right? And I think there's a lot of extra valuation that Elon adds, but there's also a little bit of discounting from his managerial style, his unpredictability. And I think you'll see that kind of unwind, and for the business to get full credit for what it really is as they inevitably transition to whoever succeeds him.
Okay. Okay. So to summarize, you're saying there is tremendous key man risk, but there's tremendous key man reward. And as an investor, you're ready to take that risk. You're okay taking that risk. You recognize it and
Yeah.
you're okay. Even with that risk, you're okay investing in Tesla. Okay. Next section, let's talk. I took some audience questions. I asked my followers what I should ask you. Got 100 replies, 100 plus replies. Even though you and I host daily spaces and I ask you dozens of questions a day, still, what people really wanted to know is more about you as a person, which we don't really get to
Mhm.
talk about in the spaces. So, first question from Alexander. Who is Omar? How did he get to this point? So, maybe a bit of background information about where you're from, your education, your professional experience, type of thing. It's to the extent that you're comfortable.
Yeah, so I grew up in Los Angeles. My dad was an immigrant. He came to the United States from Kashmir when he was 20. And so I was born in Los Angeles. I grew up here. And my dad was starting a software company around the time I was born. He had a structural engineering practice and he was making buildings, but he realized the biggest division in the business was the billing department. They actually had more people handling business billing than making the buildings withstand earthquakes, more billing people than engineers. So he made the software to automate that for the company, and they started selling it to others around the time I was born. So I kind of grew up watching this software business grow from something that was just in the attic of the engineering company to eventually him leaving and starting the software company full time. And then I got into software myself, taking some of those programming books at a young age at, 6 or 7 years old and starting to read them, starting to type them into my computer, change some of the code, write some software. Um, I started a few software projects, companies, products myself in high school. Nothing too notable. One of my first products was actually a Twitter client, funnily enough, that was integrated into iChat, and it was called Chitter. And I had several other products. There was one that was a phone system for doctors that were on call, and that was using Twilio. So a few products here and there. When I went to college, I wanted to go to Silicon Valley more than anything. So I applied to some schools and I wanted to go to Stanford. I didn't get into Stanford, but I got into another school that was not as well known nearby in Santa Clara. It was called Santa Clara University. It was actually a really awesome place where companies like Google and other big tech companies would come and recruit. There were quite a few influential people from tech there. So I went to school there. I studied computer science and economics. And freshman year, my first class that I ever went to, Calculus 1 with George Moeller, and he had developed this algorithm for predicting where crime was likely to happen in the future based on past data. So he and I ended up starting this company. He gave a presentation in the basement of my dorm, and I went up to him and I said, "Hey, this is an incredible product you've got here. If it can really predict where crime is likely to happen and help the police go and stop these crimes, that could be really powerful, but your user interface is horrible. He had a HTML page with 3 text boxes, and he would copy and paste all the crime data from the spreadsheet into his little web page and hit the button, and the whole algorithm was running in JavaScript in the web browser. And I said, let's turn this into a real product. So we turned it into a real product. We got some funding. I had a team of about 10 people working for me at the peak. And they just recently sold to some other company. But I worked there for about 5 years. We built the company up. And this is all while I was in school. A lot of the original work was done while I was in the dorm room. And so that was kind of my first experience doing a real startup with other people and managing a team of engineers. So I was kind of the technical co-founder of the company. Then about 5 years in, the business was kind of struggling. I had some disagreements about really where to go with some of the other co-founders. Just in terms of like the government sales process, it was so slow selling to these police departments. But that's really what they wanted to focus on. So my dad said, "Hey, can you please come help us at our software business?" They had this product, their Bill Quick product, which was really a Windows app. And I wanted to help them transition it into a SaaS application. So web based, monthly fee, iPhone mobile app. And so I went over to there. I worked there for, I think, 5 years or so. And just a couple years ago, we sold it to this private equity firm and we exited. And around that time, that's when I first got a Tesla. So I got a Tesla Model 3 in 2018 when they first came out, and I started tweeting about it. Oh my God, I love this car. And that's when I met Tesla Q, the Tesla short sellers,
Hmm.
and started kind of battling it out with them. They were saying, oh, this company's going to die. This company's going to fail. I said, no, I think this company is going to be huge. I love this product. It's changed my life. And it was kind of a tough time in my life. And I just enjoyed the Tesla so much. I said, wow, this is really the future of driving, and especially autopilot. That's really what captivated me from the beginning, even as early as 2015, almost 10 years ago, when they first launched Mobileye Autopilot.
Do you
Then,
remember? Do you remember the first contact? So that's the second question we have here from JMR. He says, "I know nothing about his first contact with a Tesla." So you said you bought a Model 3 in 2018,
mhm,
but you experienced it before that, I'm assuming, right?
yeah, my dad actually has bought 4 or 5 Teslas. He was one of the first Model S buyers back in 2013. He bought a 2013 Model S. So I went to college around 2011. So, a couple years into college, I come home one day and my dad's got this new car. It's a Tesla. And I'm like, whoa, what is this? And of course, when he fell asleep, I took his keys and stole the car. And it was just like nothing else I'd ever driven before. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. That instant torque, that acceleration. It was just obviously like nothing I'd ever driven before. And I love driving. I was driving a BMW 3 Series at the time. I love driving, and the Tesla just blew everything else out of the water. And obviously, the technology just incredible. 2 years later, he got a 2015 Tesla, and that had Mobileye Autopilot 1. And that just blew my mind. Even then, just with the basic lane keeping, I could see, wow, cars are eventually going to drive themselves. Even today, it can already do, maybe 70% of driving at that point. So that was what really got me interested in the company. I said, this company's going to be huge. And then when Elon Musk in 2016, I still remember where I was at my college house when I watched that unveil. And he said, we're going to do a smaller, cheaper Tesla for 35,000. And I think my BMW 3 Series at the time was around 35,000. And I said, sign me up. I put in $1,000. And 2 years later, they called me up. And the rest is history.
That's awesome. That's a really cool story. I mean, we're way over time, but I don't mind it at all because this is cool stuff.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I'm not doing
I
anything.
have
Let's go ahead.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, let's go. One more question from Ellie, a great supporter of TSLA Live on Patreon and elsewhere. He asks, "What is your goal with the WholeMars catalog account?"
Yeah, that's a good question. So, you know, when I started tweeting about Tesla in 2018 after I got my car, and this whole sort of war with the Tesla short sellers emerged, and Aaron Greenspan, one of the short sellers, who was this crazy guy, he thought he invented Facebook. And I made fun of him. I said, "This is your typical Tesla short seller. They're so delusional. This guy thinks he invented Facebook." Little did I know that was very personal for him. This guy had sued the guys who made the Facebook movie for not putting him in it. So he started coming after me and Elon. I think Bloomberg interviewed me about Autopilot at one point, and he started freaking out that I was going to be in Bloomberg Business Week. And he sent this email to Lynette Lopez and Dana Hull and um, to Tesla and everybody saying, "Hey, don't interview this guy. He's terrible. He's got, you know, he's this horrible person. He accused me of all sorts of stuff." And then he eventually sued me and Elon, for years and years, and just had this frivolous lawsuit. And he was really just trying to keep me quiet, have me stop talking about Tesla, talking about what the short sellers were doing, talking about his charity, which was sort of fraudulently promoting anti Tesla information. And it was really at that point that I realized that the media does a terrible job at explaining to people what's happening. Most of the time, they actually report the opposite of what happened. And it's very easy to fool them and to get a different story published. And most of the biggest stories that are happening, they just miss them entirely. So that was really kind of an eye-opening experience for me with the Model 3, where the media was actually on the short seller side. They reported all of the short seller stories, all of their talking points as if they were fact. And if you'd believe the media, you would have said, "Oh, this company is going to go bankrupt for sure." But that's not what happened. So it really started with this idea that people aren't getting things explained to them accurately. Frankly, a lot of the people in the media, they have, let's say, an English degree, for example, or a journalism degree. They simply don't have the technical skills to understand a lot of these things that are happening, let alone report on it accurately. And so that's kind of where I said, all right, this is something I need to do. And to be honest, I never imagined it. I was a software developer. I thought I would be writing code for computers, not words for humans. But just seeing what was going on with Tesla, how they tried to destroy Tesla, how they printed all this completely false information, and how wrong they were proven, I said, I may have something to contribute here to help people understand what's actually happening. And then you saw the SPAC bubble, and you saw companies like Nikola come to market, which were complete frauds. And then they started treating companies like Nikola like they were serious competitors to Tesla. And again, I said, well, this is completely wrong. So I just hope that I am able to help contribute to look at things more critically that other people might miss, and help people understand what's happening with our world. I mean, things are changing very rapidly, and a lot of people are in denial. But when you really look into it, you really start to understand all the economic forces at play. It's pretty clear that this transition we're seeing in sustainable energy, the rise of artificial intelligence. These are runaway trains that just can't be stopped.
All right. Now, the final question, and a little lighthearted one from our sponsor, Joa. When does he sleep? You wouldn't believe how many times I got this question in the replies. People are wondering, when are you finding time to sleep with all the tweets that you send at odd hours of the night?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been kind of a night person. I think you can get a lot done at night when everybody else falls asleep. So I've always, as a software engineer, often stayed up until, 2 a.m., 3 a.m. And I think it's really a nice time to get stuff done. And that's kind of continued. Sometimes I'll be working on stuff, tweeting. The bio says it. We cover everything 24/7. So I'll sleep when I'm dead. Until then, it's time to tweet.
All right. I'm going to thank you very much, Omar. That was a enjoyable conversation. And, there were a couple of answers in the spreadsheet, especially, that surprised me a little bit. But I hope that you come back maybe once a month or so, and we can talk about these things, update these timelines, and incorporate new information as we learn them. Try to reforecast the future, and try to understand Tesla and the world better. Thank you very much for joining. I'm going to add this link, the link to the spreadsheet with all the tabs from others as well, to the comments below this video, as well as the links to our 2 sponsors as well. And I appreciate when people support our sponsors. Thank you very much, Omar. It was nice chatting with you.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for always hosting these spaces every day. I think it's a great benefit to the community.
All right, great. Well, we'll chat soon.
Cool. Talk to you later.